This week, on Deadful Sunday, we'll be taking a look at Carole Pateman's The Sexual Contract and Judith Jarvis Thompson's A Defence of Abortion, in light of Thompson's unfortunate passing earlier on this week. In the Daily News, an obituary was published for Thompson. In it, they republished Claudia Mills's introduction of Thompson, before her keynote address at the Rocky Mountain Ethics Congress in 2009. In it, she said that by any measure, Judith Jarvis Thompson is one of the greatest philosophers of the past 5 decades. She has published scores of articles in the finest journals on a dizzying array of topics in metaphysics, action theory, ethical theory, and applied ethics." End quote. Taking Thompson's analogical arguments from A Defence of Abortion and applying them to Pateman's The Sexual Contract, this week we will analyse on what basis the social contract might be deconstructed. Carole Pateman, in her famous work The Sexual Contract, deals acutely with the intricacies of the social contract and women's place in it. She says the sexual contract is a repressed dimension of contract theory, an integral part of the rational choice of the familiar original agreement. End quote. Expanding further, Pateman casts her erudite gaze onto different forms of contract, remarking the social contract and the employment contract are systematically misrepresented, and the marriage contract is usually ignored. End quote. Pateman therefore poses the social contract, this original agreement, as being one formed in the web of the patriarchal, and by extension all other contracts that spring from it are similarly patriarchal. Interestingly, Pateman argues that this patriarchal social contract was itself formed within another contract, that of the sexual contract. As I mentioned, the social contract for Pateman was founded in this patriarchal web. It was, therefore, constructed within hierarchical sexual relations that pose men to be inherently superior to women. This sexual hierarchy infiltrates and infects all contractual, and by extension all societal, relations of which women are a part. Considering this, Pateman notes women are not party to the original contract through which men transform their natural freedom into the security of civil freedom. Women are the subject of the contract. How can beings who lack the capacities to make contracts nevertheless be supposed always to enter into this contract? End quote. Here then, Pateman's argument is that men enter into the social contract for women. The patriarch consents in the woman's place, primarily because women are conceived as unable or incapable of entering into the contractual and therefore consensual agreement. Women are, for Pateman, the eternal subaltern in a patriarchal society. With this in mind, we can turn to the late Judith Jarvis Thompson and her infamous analogy of the famous violinist in her text A Defence of Abortion. Nobody puts it better than her, so here I quote at length. "You wake up in the morning and find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous unconscious violinist. He's been found to have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all the available medical records and found that you alone have the right blood type to help. They have therefore kidnapped you, and last night the violinist's circulatory system was plugged into yours, so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood as well as your own. The director of the hospital now tells you, look, we're sorry the Society of Music Lovers did this to you. We would never have permitted it if we'd known. But still, they did it, and the violinist now is plugged into you. To unplug you would be to kill him, but never mind, it's only for 9 months. By then, he will have recovered from his ailment and can safely be unplugged from you." End quote. The violinist, that is the fetus, stands in parasitic relation to the kidnapped individual, that is the woman. And within some discourses, this is an inviolable relation in which the woman is bound to remain. Thompson expands further, again by way of useful analogy, as was her MO. Here she states, suppose you find yourself trapped in a tiny house with a growing child. I mean a very tiny house, and a rapidly growing child. You are already up against the wall of the house, and in a few minutes you'll be crushed to death. The child, on the other hand, won't be crushed to death. If nothing is done to stop him from growing, he'll be hurt. But in the end, he'll simply burst open the house and walk out a free man. but it cannot be concluded that you too can do nothing, that you cannot attack it to save your life. However innocent the child may be, you do not have to wait passively while it crushes you to death." End quote. Thompson reserves the right of the woman to respond to that which she perceives as a fetal threat, so as to preserve her own right to life. Now, returning to Pateman's The Sexual Contract, and with Thompson's analogies in mind, how might women's unconsensual entry into the social contract be resolved? I argue that, like with the absurdity of the violinist and the rapidly growing child, women are under threat within this contractual relation, and therefore should perceive it as such. Unlike the discourse of abortion within liberalism's rights framework, this capacity to respond to threat should not be a right conferred upon women. Instead, the social contract entered into by men for all persons should be torn down, should be broken, not because women have the right to do so, but because they are not bound by the obligation to observe it. Taking this logic further, it was the white, heterosexual, cis, able-bodied, wealthy man that constructed this contract to which we are now all presented as being bound to and bound by. It is, therefore, the job of women, BAME people, queers, trans persons, the non-able-bodied, non-neuronormative people, and the working class, to bring down the social contract, whose consensual basis was never consented to by them. This is not to say that the social contract is not a viable basis for societal relations to function from, but rather that it is this social contract which violates the very foundations it is meant to produce and preserve. This marks the end of the 10th episode of DeadPhilSundays. We hope you enjoyed it, and that we'll see you again next week.